Imagine for 1 second that the most terrifying fight in Muhammad Ali's life, the one where he was closest to death and total destruction, took place not in the blood-soaked ring of the Colosseum arena, nor under the heavy fists of Joe Frazier. The real slaughter, which sports commentators kept silent about and which was shamefully edited out of documentaries, happened exactly 48 hours before the opening bell, in the luxurious but stifling interiors of a presidential suite at a hotel in Manila. It is September 28, 1975. The air in the Philippines is so humid, it feels like you are breathing water, but there is no air in this room for another reason. The space is electrified with a fury so potent, it seems the window glass is about to burst. In the corner of the room, covering his head with his hands, in a way he never did in his fights against Liston or Foreman, cowers the greatest. His face, insured for millions, is distorted in a grimace of animal terror, and a thin stream of blood flows down his cheek, left not by an opponent's glove, but by a sharp, well-manicured female fingernail. Opposite him stands not a heavyweight boxer, but a woman whose eyes flash lightning capable of incinerating cities. This is Khalila Ali, his lawful wife, the mother of his 4 children, the woman who walked through the hell of exile and poverty with him. She has just flown 13,000 kilometers across the ocean, hasn't slept for 24 hours, and she didn't come here to wish her husband luck. She came to destroy him. Around them, on the expensive carpet, lie the shards of Chinese vases, overturned chairs, and shirts torn to shreds. But amidst this chaos, there is one object more dangerous than any weapon, an object that became the detonator of this explosion. Look closely at Ali's feet. There, among the broken porcelain, lies a crumpled black and white newspaper clipping. This is our dagger, the very piece of evidence that turned the life of a living saint into a cheap, dirty soap opera. You think Ali was caught in a common affair? Oh no, if only it were that simple. Ali made a mistake bordering on madness, the mistake of a man whose ego had swollen to such dimensions that it blocked his survival instinct. A couple of days earlier, blinded by flattery and power, he had brought his new mistress to an official reception with the President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, a 19-year-old model named Veronica Portia, a girl of dazzling beauty who looked at him as if he were a deity. Ali felt invulnerable. He was the king of the world. He was in another country, in another time zone, and when the dictator Marcos, smiling, asked him, "And who is this beautiful lady next to you?" Ali, losing his vigilance, blurted out the phrase that signed his death warrant. He said, "This is my wife." He thought this lie would stay within the palace walls, that it would dissolve into the tropical air like cigar smoke. But he forgot that he was the most media-prominent face on the planet. Journalists recorded it. Photographers took pictures. And by the next morning, this news, printed in the newspapers, had crossed the Pacific Ocean and landed on the table at Ali's home in the United States. Ask yourself honestly, how would you feel sitting at home with the children, while your husband, who publicly preaches morality, loyalty, and the laws of Allah, introduces another woman, younger, brighter, newer, as his spouse to heads of state? Khalila Ali didn't just feel pain, she felt the foundation of her world crumbling. She saw that newspaper clipping, and in that same second, the love in her heart transformed into cold, calculating rage. She realized that all of Ali's words about religion, about the sanctity of marriage, were just a facade hiding a common, lustful liar who believed everything was permitted to him. She didn't call. She didn't cry into her pillow. She packed a suitcase, bought a ticket for the first flight to Manila, and vowed to make him answer for this humiliation. And here she is, in the hotel room. Ali's security, those massive guys who could stop a tank, parted before her like the waters of the Red Sea, because they knew Khalila held a black belt in karate, and in this state she was more dangerous than any armed mercenary. She burst into the suite like Hurricane Katrina. Ali, who who was enjoying himself with Veronica at the time, turned so pale his skin became gray. Veronica managed to hide in the bathroom, but Ali was left one-on-one with retribution. "You think you're the greatest?" Khalila screamed, hurling ashtrays at him. "You are nobody. You are a liar. You are a hypocrite. You are shaming your children." Ali tried to justify himself, stammering something about just a friend, about a journalist's mistake. But Khalila knew the truth. She threw that very newspaper clipping in his face, and the paper hit him harder than any jab. At that moment, Ali realized he had lost. He could fool the referee. He could fool his opponent. He could fool the whole world, but he could not fool the woman who knew the real him. Do you see the contrast? The man who in 48 hours is supposed to step out for the Thriller in Manila to fight to the death in 50-degree heat is now running around the room in his underwear, ducking his wife's blows, and in his eyes there isn't a drop of the confidence we are used to seeing on the posters. His focus is shattered. His concentration is destroyed. Instead of preparing for the fight with Frazier, he is thinking about how to save his reputation, how to silence this scandal, how to survive in this room. He is a hostage of his own passions, a small, weak man caught in a web of lies. And when Khalila, having exhausted her first wave of anger, fell silent, breathing heavily, the kind of silence that precedes an execution hung in the room. Ali looked at her, then at the newspaper clipping on the floor, and realized that even if he won the fight against Frazier, he had already lost something much more important. He had lost the right to be called a righteous man, and this loss would haunt him until the end of his days. Let us strip away the gilding from this story and look into the eyes of the truth that was hidden for decades behind glossy posters and heroic myths. Muhammad Ali, the man the world revered as the moral compass of an era, was in his private life not just a sinner, he was a pathological, serial betrayer whose confidence in his own impunity bordered on megalomania. You are used to seeing him as a fighter for the rights of the oppressed, but in his relationships with women, he himself became the oppressor, a tyrant who sincerely believed that the laws of morality were written for ordinary people, not for living gods. While he shouted from podiums about righteousness and the laws of Allah, a shadow harem always existed behind his back, carefully hidden by his entourage. But in September 1975, in the stifling, sticky atmosphere of Manila, this double life developed a crack that threatened to bury him faster than any hook from Joe Frazier. To understand the scale of the catastrophe, one must realize the context. Ali did not fly to the Philippines alone. He brought Veronica Portia with him, a dazzling 19-year-old model, a poster girl who looked at him with the adoration that so flattered his inflated ego. Do you think he hid her? Do you think he kept her in a secret hotel on the outskirts of the city, as any cautious man with a lawful wife and 4 children at home would do? That is the logic of a coward, and Ali considered himself invulnerable. He settled her in his suite. He took her to restaurants. He let her sit in the front row at training sessions. He behaved as if his marriage to Khalila Ali, the woman who had been with him during the darkest years of exile, had ceased to exist simply because he had flown into a different time zone. But the fatal mistake, the very trigger that set the destruction mechanism in motion, happened not in the bedroom, but under the flashes of hundreds of cameras at a state reception hosted by the president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. Imagine this scene: a magnificent palace, crystal chandeliers, a military dictatorship trying to look civilized, and in the center of it all, Ali, shining like the sun. Next to him stands Veronica, and she looks not like a mistress, but like a queen. Dictator Marcos, wishing to compliment his guest, asks a simple social question: "And who is this beautiful woman accompanying you?" At that moment, time freezes. Ali has a second to think. He could say, "My assistant, a friend, a translator." Any lie would have saved the situation. But Ali is drunk on power, drunk on attention, and his narcissism plays a cruel joke on him. He wants everyone to envy him right now, in this second. And he utters the phrase that becomes his sentence, "This is my wife." He smiles. Veronica beams. Marcos nods. Ali thinks these are just words thrown into the air of a tropical island. He forgets one small detail that turns everything upside down. He is the biggest star on planet Earth. Every word of his is recorded, and within a few hours, this phrase, printed in bold under a photograph of Ali and Veronica, flies across the ocean to fall on the doorstep of his home in Chicago, turning into that very newspaper clipping we spoke of. Let us move to the other side of the globe. Khalila Ali is sitting in their huge, empty house. She turns on the television, expecting to see news about her husband's preparation for the fight, his training, his health. But instead, a news anchor with a cheerful smile reports on the social outing of the Ali couple in Manila and shows footage of the reception. Ask yourself, what happens in the soul of a woman who sees her husband embracing another and hears him publicly give her his title, her status, her name? The viewer expects tears. We are used to seeing women in such situations as victims who cry into pillows and call friends. But Khalila Ali was no ordinary woman. She was a daughter of the Nation of Islam. She wore a black belt in karate, and in her veins flowed not water, but fire. In the second she saw this betrayal, she did not feel grief. She felt cold, crystal clear rage. She realized that Ali hadn't just cheated on her physically. He had tried to erase her from reality, to replace her with a newer, glossier version, the way one replaces an old car. He publicly humiliated her before the whole world, before their children, before their community. And she made a decision that would have made any man who knew her character turn white with terror. She didn't call him and throw a fit over the phone. She didn't write letters. She calmly stood up, packed her things, kissed the children, and bought a ticket for the next flight to Manila. It was the flight of a Valkyrie, 13,000 kilometers over the ocean, 20 hours in the confined space of an airplane, alone with her thoughts and that same newspaper she gripped in her hands until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't flying to save the marriage. She was flying to remind the greatest that he might be the king of the world, to the fans, but to her he was a liar who had broken his vow. While Ali in Manila continued to play the role of the happy lover, unaware that a storm was approaching him, Khalila, in the sky over the Pacific, was planning her revenge. She knew that 2 days before the fight with Frazier, Ali needed to be maximally focused, calm, and detached. And that is exactly why she chose this moment. She wasn't just going to cause a scene. She was going to destroy his mental balance, shatter his focus to pieces, make him feel the same pain and humiliation she felt. She was bringing him not forgiveness, but war. And when the wheels of her plane touched the runway at Manila Airport, the countdown to the collapse of Muhammad Ali's personal life reached 0. When the elevator at the Hilton Hotel in Manila chimed, opening its doors on the presidential suite floor, the air in the hallway thickened so much it felt as if gravity had doubled. Khalila Ali stepped into the corridor, and her footsteps on the soft carpet were silent, but the security, those same giants from the Nation of Islam, who were supposed to protect the champion from bullets and crazy fans, parted before her with a haste bordering on panic. Do you think they tried to stop her? Do you think someone blocked her path with a hand and said, "Ma'am, the champion is resting"? No. These men, who feared no one, feared her. They saw her eyes. There were no tears. There was no hysteria. There was that same cold, deadly determination of an executioner come to carry out a sentence. They knew Khalila had a black belt in karate, but they didn't fear her blows. They feared the truth she carried with her, a truth capable of destroying Ali's fragile psyche 2 days before the heaviest fight of his life. She approached the door of room 204. She didn't knock. She didn't wait for an invitation. She simply pushed the door and it gave way, opening a portal to hell for the man inside. The scene that opened to her eyes was worthy of the finale of a Greek tragedy. Muhammad Ali, the greatest, the man who in 48 hours was supposed to go out and kill Joe Frazier, sat in a chair in a relaxed pose, laughing at some joke. Next to him, radiant with youth and beauty, was Veronica Portia. In the second they saw Kalila, the laughter cut off as if someone had severed their vocal cords. An absolute vacuum-like, visual silence filled the room. Time stopped. Veronica, understanding everything without words, fled with a shriek into the bathroom and locked herself in, leaving her hero alone in the face of the storm. Ali remained seated. His face, which he so loved to show the cameras, lost all color in an instant, becoming gray as cigar ash. He opened his mouth to say something, to turn on his famous charm that had rescued him thousands of times, but Kalila gave him no chance. She didn't start screaming right away. She slowly, frighteningly calmly, raised the hand clutching that same crumpled newspaper clipping with the photo of his betrayal. She opened her fingers, and the paper, spinning, fell at Ali's feet. It was a gesture of total contempt. "You told them she was your wife?" Her voice was quiet, but it made the walls vibrate. "Then who am I? Who are your children?" Ali tried to stand, tried to turn it into a joke, tried to say, "Baby, it's just the press. They got it all mixed up." But at that moment, Kalila exploded. What happened next, biographers call a family quarrel, but any witness will tell you it was a massacre. Kalila grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray from the table and hurled it at the head of the man considered the most elusive boxer on the planet. Ali barely managed to duck, and the ashtray shattered against the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. Do you understand the irony? The man who built a career on being impossible to hit was now scurrying around a hotel room in his underwear, dodging lamps, glasses, and vases that flew at him with sniper precision. "You hypocrite!" she screamed, overturning the coffee table. "You preach righteousness, but you live like a filthy animal." Every object breaking on the floor was a symbol of how his focus was breaking before the fight. Ali was terrified, not physically. He knew she wouldn't kill him, but mystically. He believed his strength came from his spiritual purity, from his connection with Allah. And now, as his wife, the mother of his children, cursed him, calling him a liar and an adulterer, he felt that power leaving his body. He felt dirty. He felt weak. The viewer at this moment expects Ali to show character, to grab her hands, calm her down, show masculine strength. But here the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, turning everything upside down. The greatest turned out to be small. He didn't defend himself. He whimpered. He begged. He hid behind the furniture, muttering pathetic excuses. "Kalila, please, I have a fight. Frazier, you're going to kill me." He looked pathetic. In this room, there was no world champion. In this room, there was a frightened, caught red-handed cheater who realized his mask had been ripped off. Kalila stopped only when there was nothing left whole in the room. She stood in the middle of the ruins, breathing heavily, and looked at her husband, who was pressed against the wall. In her eyes, there was no more rage. There was only disgust. "You may win this fight," she said, and these words hit him harder than any hook from Frazier. "But you have lost me. You have lost respect. You are empty." She turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard that plaster fell from the ceiling. Ali was left alone in the trashed suite. Veronica peeked cautiously out of the bathroom, but Ali didn't even look at her. He slid down the wall to the floor, right onto the shards of glass and that same newspaper clipping. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding, not in the rhythm of a champion, but in the rhythm of panic. In 48 hours, he had to step into the ring against a man who wanted to kill him, against Joe Frazier, who was ready to die for victory. And Ali? Ali was hollowed out. His mental armor was pierced. He realized he had entered this fight already a loser, because his rear guard had been destroyed by his own lust and stupidity. That night in the hotel, he didn't sleep for a second, replaying his wife's words in his head, and when the morning of the fight came, he looked not like a warrior, but like a man walking to the scaffold, knowing he was guilty. October 1st, 1975, Quezon City, the Colosseum arena. If you think hell is a biblical abstraction, then you have never been in that hall on the morning when the temperature under the aluminum roof reached 50 degrees Celsius, turning the air into a glowing broth in which people were boiled alive. Muhammad Ali entered the ring against Joe Frazier, and the crowd roared with delight, expecting to see the usual butterfly dance. But those who knew Ali closely, those who saw his eyes in the locker room, noticed something frightening. There was no fire in them. There was a void. You probably attribute this to the heat or age, but the truth is that Ali entered this fight already half dead. His legs, those legendary legs that could circle an opponent for 15 rounds, were filled with lead, not from fatigue, but from sleepless nights and the colossal stress that had sucked all the life force out of him in the hotel room, 48 hours before the bell. The scandal with Khalila, the flying ashtrays, the screams, the accusations, none of it passed without a trace. It was a mental amputation, and the one who stepped out for the fight of the century was not a complete warrior, but a shell inside of which the wind howled. The fight began, and it was not a sporting contest, but a public self-flagellation. Ali did not move. He stood at the ropes and took Frazier's punches, blows of such monstrous power they could have stopped a horse's heart. Why didn't he move away? Why did he let Joe turn his kidneys and liver into mincemeat? The viewer thinks, this is a tactic. This is rope-a-dope. But here that same Santa Barbara effect triggers, forcing you to see what's happening from a completely different angle. It wasn't a tactic. It was atonement. In the depths of his subconscious, Ali felt guilty. He felt like a dirty, lying traitor who had humiliated the mother of his children, and he perceived every one of Frazier's blows not as an enemy's attack, but as a deserved punishment, as a whip with which fate lashed him for his sins. He wanted pain. He wanted physical suffering to drown out the voice of conscience shouting in his head with Khalila's voice, "You are empty." By the 14th round, both fighters were on the verge of clinical death. Ali would later say, "It was the closest to death I've ever been." But he didn't say the main thing. He was ready to die because he had nowhere to return. When the fight was stopped and the referee raised his hand, Ali did not celebrate. He collapsed onto the canvas unconscious. It was not the triumph of a winner. It was the collapse of a man who had run out of fuel. He was carried out of the ring. He was taken back to the hotel, to that very presidential suite where 2 days ago the hurricane named Khalila had raged. And here comes the moment of truth, that intellectual orgasm of tragedy that hits harder than any knockout. Ali entered the room, expecting, what? A scandal? A continuation of the fight? But in the room reigned visual silence, more terrifying than any scream. The room was perfectly cleaned. The shards of the vases were swept away. The furniture was set back in its place. But in this sterile cleanliness, something was missing. Khalila was not there. Khalila's things were not there. She didn't stay to wait for the outcome of the fight. She didn't stay to wash his wounds or congratulate him on the victory. She did what she promised. She left. She got on a plane and flew back to the USA, leaving him alone with his belt, his money, and his mistress, who now seemed to him not a trophy, but a curse. That crumpled newspaper clipping that caused the war had disappeared into the trash bin, but its work was done. It had cut Ali's life into before and after. He won the Thriller in Manila. He proved to the whole world that he was the greatest boxer in history. But that night, lying in an empty bed, beaten, hollowed out, he realized he had lost the main fight of his life. Do you think Veronica Portia replaced his family? It's an illusion. Veronica was a beautiful decoration, but Khalila was his foundation, his link to reality, the person who knew him as weak and loved him anyway. And now that foundation had collapsed. The divorce that followed was the most expensive and dirty in sports history at the time, but the money was the least of the problems. Ali lost the moral right to be a leader. His children, who saw the newspaper headlines, distanced themselves from him. His reputation as a righteous man cracked. He continued to smile for the cameras. He married Veronica, then divorced, then married again. But that internal core, that absolute confidence in his own rightness that made him invincible, vanished in that Manila room. He became vulnerable. He became ordinary. The dagger in the form of a newspaper clipping inflicted a wound that did not heal for years, turning into a chronic disease of the soul. Ali realized that his greatness in the ring did not give him immunity from the consequences of his baseness in life. He thought he could rewrite the rules of morality for himself, as he had rewritten the rules of boxing, but life cruelly put him in his place, showing that there is always a price to pay for betrayal, and the currency in this deal is not dollars, but loneliness. The victory in Manila was Pyrrhic. He kept the world champion title, but lost the title of a decent husband and father, and when he looked in the mirror at his swollen face, he saw there not a hero, but a man who had traded the eternal for the temporary, and was left at a broken trough full of gold medals. Today, when we look at the final touching footage of Muhammad Ali's life, where he, gray-haired and shackled by disease, sits surrounded by his many daughters, our hearts melt with tenderness, and we see in this the perfect picture of a patriarchal idyll, the well-deserved rest of a warrior surrounded by love. But if you gather the courage and scrape away this glossy layer of varnish applied by PR agents and time, you will find beneath it not an icon of family values, but ruins on which flowers of forgiveness have grown, watered by the tears of rejected children. You probably think the scandal in Manila with that very newspaper clipping was a single mistake, a momentary clouding of the mind at the peak of fame. That is the lie we find convenient to believe so as not to destroy the image of the hero. But the truth is that the clipping was not a mistake. It was a diagnosis. It was merely the first publicly documented symptom of a chronic disease of the soul that drove the greatest to seek confirmation of his divinity in the beds of hundreds of women, leaving behind a trail of broken destinies and genetic material he spent decades trying to hide or buy off with money from that same gilded briefcase. Ask yourself, how could a man who preached responsibility and morality from UN podiums ignore the existence of his own flesh and blood for years? While the world carried Ali in its arms, in the shadow of his greatness, children grew up, Mia, Kalia, and others, who knew him not as a legend, but as an uncle who occasionally stopped by with gifts, but forbade them from calling him daddy in public. Imagine the pain of a child who sees their father on TV, where he embraces the official children, and then goes to school and cannot say whose son or daughter they are because daddy said it was our secret. This was psychological abuse stretched over years, and it was more terrifying than any physical blow because Ali used his fame as a shield behind which he hid his irresponsibility. He thought his greatness gave him the right to rewrite the laws of biology and ethics, that he could simply erase inconvenient people from his biography, the way he erased Joe Frazier. But here the final inexorable Santa Barbara effect triggers, proving that karma is a boomerang that always returns, even if you know how to dodge blows better than anyone in the world. Parkinson's disease, which locked Ali in his body, took away his ability to run from wives, from mistresses, from responsibility. In the final years of his life, when he could no longer speak, these women and these children he once hid or humiliated became the only people who cared for him. The irony of fate reached biblical proportions. Khalila, whom he betrayed in Manila, Veronica, whom he left for the next wife, Lonnie, who became his last caregiver, and the illegitimate children he refused to acknowledge for a long time. They all gathered around his bed. But this was not a gathering of fans. It was a living reproach. Looking into their eyes, Ali, deprived of the gift of speech, could no longer justify himself, could not joke, could not use his charm. He was forced to listen to the silence in which the same silent question sounded. Was it worth it? That crumpled newspaper clipping from 1975 that Kalila threw in his face, metaphorically transformed into thousands of lawsuits and DNA tests that haunted his legacy even after death. We are used to separating the creator from his creations, the athlete from the man, but in Ali's case, this line is blurred to the point of impossibility. His strength in the ring was fueled by his confidence in his own exceptionalism. But that same exceptionalism made him a monster in his private life. He believed the rules were written for little people, and he was a giant to whom everything was permitted. But at the end of his life, he turned out to be the smallest person in the room, dependent on the mercy of those he once betrayed. And now, as we stand before the monument of his life, I want to ask you a question that should destroy your comfort and make you reconsider your values. Are we ready to forgive a genius for everything, cruelty, betrayal, hypocrisy, only because he danced beautifully in the ring and said the right things about war and peace? Is public greatness an indulgence for private baseness? Look at Ali not as a champion, but as a husband who brought a mistress to a reception with a president, humiliating his wife. Look at him as a father who forced his children to hide their origin. Does this man deserve our unconditional worship? Or must we admit that our idol was made of gold only on the outside, and on the inside was filled with the same filth as the ordinary mortals he so loved to lecture? Whose side are you on in this final round of the battle for truth? On the side of a beautiful legend that inspires millions, or on the side of a bitter reality where behind every great man lies a trail of tears from the women he trampled on his way to the pedestal? Write your opinion in the comments, because your answer will show whether you are ready to accept a hero with all his scars, or if you only need a beautiful, retouched lie.